Thank you for joining the Once Changing the World, India's first Future Tech Meets Sustainability podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. Robert Klupacs, who's the CEO of the Bionics Institute, which is a world leader in medical device development. He has over 30 years of international corporate experience in technology development, mainly in the fields of medical technologies and biotechnology, with a particular focus on healthcare, and is currently a non-executive director at Bionic Vision Technologies Pty Limited and ASX-listed Biogene Technology Limited. So, Robert, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. Why don't we start with, what is biotechnology and bionics technology? Because there's a haziness over there. So maybe I think it'd be great if you could start from there.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Pleasure to be asked. So biotechnology is a field that I grew up in, and that's what I would argue is much more the molecular development part of the biotechnology bio framework, understanding molecular biology, cell biology, plant biology. All that is what I call biotechnology. Bionics, as the word implies, it's made up of two things. It's biology, bio, but the nix comes from electronics. And bionics, as opposed to biotechnology, is the combination of physiology and electronics. And so the difference is between biotechnology, it covers a lot of mechanistic, molecular-based work, whereas bionics does cover a lot more basic electronic and device-based work. That's how I would describe the difference.
Right. Now, you're the CEO of the Bionic Institute. Could you talk about explaining what is Bionic Institute's its mission and its core research focus?
Yeah, our mission is very much to develop bionic devices to transform the lives of people with debilitating disease. We came into being 40 years ago during the pioneering work of Professor Graham Clark, who developed the cochlear implant, which is stimulation of the nerve cells in the ear. Subsequently, we've taken that concept of a multidisciplinary approach to device development to also work about stimulating and recording from the nervous system to create a range of medical devices that can have an impact. And so right now, our whole mission is to translate, as opposed to research, devices and prototypes all the way through to that get to clinical validation and perhaps usage by large-scale people. So we work across a number of disease headings, but primarily in hearing research now, a legacy of our cochlear implant days, but we've expanded that dramatically. We work very much in chronic inflammatory conditions. We've got a series of devices that work through stimulating the vagus nerve by quite unique mechanisms, which have had some profound results, which are moving into the clinic. And we continue to do lots of work in brain mapping and brain research. And we work developing devices and improving devices for Parkinson's disease. We're using a magnetic stimulation approach, which we're fascinated by, which we think can cure Alzheimer's disease. We've created a magnificent tool combining some of the knowledge of cochlear implantation and now electronics to have a fully integrated long-term seizure monitoring device for epilepsy, which is groundbreaking for people with the disease. And we're looking at a number of different applications in stroke and motor neuron disease as well, using devices. So it sounds quite broad, but the underlying platform we have is using electronics and devices to stimulate the nervous system in particular, and then trying to find diseases where that can have an impact. And we have about 117 people who work here, a combination of engineers, scientists, and the scientists range from auditory neuroscience to physicists to mathematicians to data scientists. And because we're located within one of Melbourne, Australia's major teaching hospitals, we have about 35 or 40 specialist physicians and doctors who consult to us and engage with us on our ongoing development. So it's a really interesting melting pot of cross-disciplinary skills that enables us to rapidly translate our concepts into the clinic.
Lovely. How cool is that? I want to break down these research areas, but before I kind of get into that, mentioned you are the pioneers in the cochlear implant space. Over the period, I mean, from the early days of, setting up cochlear implant plants, pioneering that space. I mean, the entire science and technology area is accelerated. It's the tech acceleration has kind of led to miniaturization of technology, and there is more and more implants, wearable device, and we are understanding our biology much better. And by understanding the biology much better, like it's like we enabling the better healthcare products, better wearables, better implants. But how's the acceptance been? I mean, talk to us about that. I mean, right from the earlier days, is there still resistance to these wearable devices, or from the moral and ethical camp, or there is more acceptance to these wearables, post the benefits of these?
Yeah, I think two answers. In terms of wearables, I mean, we're all wearing Garmin watches and Apple watches, and people just accept wearables now as part of their daily living, particularly for a lot of disease monitoring linked to apps. It seems to have become almost passé, and the more information you get, a lot of those tools for wellness and self-monitoring, I think have become almost integrated, and that's building on the knowledge that we've got. The question possibly you're asking is, what do people think of implantable devices and the impact that implantable devices may have on their lives? And I think if you look back 30 or 40 years, Eddie, the cochlear implant was just starting. It's now been accepted. Pacemaker technology was in its infancy. I think now so many people have pacemakers for their heart. You think of other types of implantable devices that people have got put in, whether they be orthopedic, heart monitoring, and more recently, sort of putting things into people's heads to monitor what's going on. And people now have even had implanted glucose sensing monitors so they can have closed loop insulin control. I think there's no doubt that implantable devices are much more accepted, although people still think, oh, that's difficult, and I'll prefer to have a drug rather than a device in me forever. I think what's changing a little bit, and I think this is moving down the implantable pathway, is that people are realizing drug therapy is incredibly expensive. Still, with a lot of the newer drugs, effective, improves lives, particularly life span, but not always quality of life, and people can't afford it. And so the idea of developing an implantable device that perhaps can be put in for a one-off cost and maybe an annual visit to the doctor, which can alleviate symptoms, if you think of spinal cord stimulation or the like, a sacral nerve stimulation or the like, that's a lot cheaper than having pain drugs every day of your life with much less side effects. So I see this changing both from a patient-directed, do I really want to take these nasty drugs forever and I can't afford them, to much better devices coming through that can give them longer-term support. It hasn't quite got through a tipping point, I think it's fair to say. I think some of the devices are still bulky. I think the surgery is still, in many cases, difficult. And there's not as many surgeons who are quite well trained enough to put them in a mass setting point of view, and so the cost puts people off. But I see that's changed dramatically in the last 10 years, and I look forward 10 years, Eddie, and I can see implantable systems allied to wearable systems becoming much more prevalent across the medical sector.
Right. Yeah, I really hope and I wish that, because there's so many people with debilitating health conditions, and maybe these implants are the only route to give them quality life. Now, you said you got your research field is across various fields, right from brain research to autoimmune and chronic disease to hearing and vision research and even bionic limbs research. Talking about implants, maybe can you elaborate on your research when it comes to brain research, and how has that helped? What are the products that's been come out of the research, and how has that led to better healthcare?
Yeah, so a lot of the products that we've got to do with sensing, EEG-based sensing in particular. So the device that we developed for epilepsy monitoring. One of the issues that people know, if you're trying to treat someone with epilepsy, you need some feedback, and oftentimes most epilepsy patients will take a handwritten log of, I've had this many seizures this week, doctor, and go and see the doctor, and he'll try to change their therapy. We now know that most of those things are wrong because of the amnesic response of seizures. They're so short, people are missing them, a lot happening in their sleep. And so that's a terrible way to treat the disease. So everyone's been looking for a long-term monitoring tool of seizure patterns across a patient so the doctors can get a framework. If you think about it, the maximum time people can go to a hospital clinic to get tested is 7 days, and that costs about $50,000. So that wasn't working. So people have been trying to fix it. For us, we developed a device that can be transplanted by just below the skin on top of the scalp, which is a very, very sensitive EEG collecting signal electrode. We've implanted that now in 27 patients, in some cases greater than 3 years. We've now got a tremendous signal that can be mapped 24/7 for those patients. And that's been wonderful to give them feedback. But more importantly, what that's meant is we've now got a personalised signature of EEG seizure patterns for patients. And with some quite detailed machine learning capability, getting access to that long-term data, we've been able to develop algorithms that can now forecast with very significant accuracy when people are likely to have a seizure. And one of the issues with epilepsy is that most people with epilepsy are fine 99% of the time. That 1% of the time when they have a seizure, they just don't know when they're going to get it. So that stuffs up the rest of their lives. So if you can now forecast when you're likely to get it, or more importantly, with some of the advanced algorithms we've developed, we think we can now predict within reasonable confidence in some cases, and that's getting much better. We can develop a predictive tool. We implant you with it. You're an epileptic. We implant you with this device. You wear it for 2 or 3 months. We can collect your particular signals and then running our algorithm techniques now program into your settings a predictive tool to say when you are going to have a seizure so you can sit down and make yourself ready for it. Now, if you think of the impact that would have on people suffering from epilepsy, that's extraordinary. And that's probably only 2 or 3 years away now. That's one that we've done. The second one that I really like talking about is in the field of Parkinson's disease. There's some pretty good drugs, but they usually stop working. So a technique known as deep brain stimulation has been shown to be very effective. It has some issues, but it's been shown very effective when used. A lot of people were reluctant to go through the procedure because it needs to be done awake. The surgery is quite difficult. You need very gifted surgeons, and you also need to get the stimulating electrode to the right place every single time to be effective. And that was hard. And so the electrical engineers that I work with, working with neurologists and neurosurgeons, were able to find this particular signal that can help guide the electrode every single time, like using a sonar to guide it to exactly the right spot. Now, we're working with a major medtech company to integrate that finding into their technology. And what that likely means is we can now do the surgery in the sleep setting as opposed to having to have the patient awake. Families love that. It means that surgeons, rather than using trial and error or very gifted, can now use a tool to help them guide with much greater accuracy. So it's much more likely they're more willing to do it and they can do it faster. So if at the moment 15,000 people a year are having deep brain stimulation, it's not very many. If our technique can be translated, which we think it can in the next 2 or 3 years, those numbers could double or triple or quadruple. And that's quite an amazing number. But that's all to do with my guys, my electrical engineers, my mathematicians and data scientists working together with neurologists and neurosurgeons to come up with something. It took 6 years to identify the signal, and now it's moving forward. And so we're very proud of that. And then more recently, again, using a modification of our EEG technique, we're thinking that people who have had hemorrhagic stroke, we can utilize some of those things to actually work out whether they are likely to be at risk of further bleeds or not. and so a tool to be able to take them out of ICU into general care. Might not sound like very much, but that has a huge impact on the health of patients who have had hemorrhagic stroke. So that's one thing that's in development. And the last thing that I'm really proud of is that we've just brought in a team in recent times who want to pioneer a different approach to treating cognitive decline or Alzheimer's disease by getting the brain networks to reconnect using magnetism and transmagnetic stimulation of particular parts of the brain, utilizing some personalized algorithms that we've developed to say, which part of the brain do we need to stimulate to create new networks for you? The early pilot results are really fascinating and incredible. We're now about to start a major trial, and we think that could revolutionize the way Alzheimer's is treated in the next 5 or 10 years. So they're just an example. There's a few other things bubbling along below the surface, but those are the 4 things that we've publicised most, Eddie.
We at the cusp of a very fantastic point in time where maybe in the next few decades, all of these like really chronic health issues, especially neurological, could be, maybe, controlled in ways or completely be treated. So exciting times. Now, the Bionic Institute has also been involved in developing a bionic eye implant. Can you tell us a little bit more about this technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of stalled for lack of funding, but at this point in time, but we're very proud. We work with a consortium, and one of the issues with bionic eye development is that previous iterations when this first came about would take 11 or 12 hours worth of surgery. They'd be stapling effectively devices onto the retina. And if people are aware of the anatomy of the retina, it's like effectively like wet tissue paper is the consistency of it. You can imagine what it's like to be stapling things onto that. So we knew that was always going to be problematic and it would move around. So when my guys designed a concept with our ophthalmological surgeons, there's a particular pocket just between the retina, the suprachoroidal pocket. We designed a device that could be slid in. That was the first innovation. So it can be done with much more simple surgery. And then the device itself was much smaller than others, had 44 really unique electrodes added into it, and we can then stimulate those electrodes to send signals back to the retina to cause, or the visual cortex, to allow blind people effectively to see pixels or light stimulation if there was an object in front of them. The results that we had, we don't give people often think bionic eyes are giving people back sight like you and I know. What they really are is a fantastic visual aid for people who are unsighted to know that there's an object in the way. So if you think of a blind person who's got a guide dog, guide dogs often can only see, a metre off the ground, and so someone's working, they're hoping the dog can see a tree branch, they usually can't. With the bionic eye, people knew that object, they could physically see that there would be an object in front of them by lights flashing in response to this. So that was really quite powerful, and a lot more work has been done developing depth perception into the technique we developed, and we could have people walking along unaided by having blind people, really no capability of seeing anything, being able to walk unassisted simply because they could pick up objects in their way because their eye or visual cortex was being stimulated by what was happening in front of us with the device in their eye. That is something we're extremely proud of, but the company needs to raise it's been put into a company, 7 patients have been implanted, results quite extraordinary. The company needs to raise another $20 million to move itself forward to do a major clinical trial to get FDA registration. And that's been difficult in the current climate, but it is sitting there as one of the most wonderful advances of all time. And it's pretty frustrating that we can't raise the money, but we're going to keep trying. And the people running the company are continuing to try because the technology is just so good.
Eyesight is the core to a human, and it is a huge and genuine problem. I mean, if solved, can really upend the world completely. And it's surprising that the funding is not there, because I mean, I see VCs pouring in money in products which are like really not even ready. So it's extremely surprising that I mean, VCs are not funding like a genuine problem. Can you elaborate on this suprachoroidal visual implant that you talk about? I mean, could you elaborate on this? What's the process? Is there glasses that the patient needs to wear? How does, I mean, and what is it that the person, I mean, the blind person can see? The test that you've done at this point in time. How do you enable that? If you can elaborate on this, it'll be nice.
I probably need a diagram to show you, but really there's an electrode that's effectively put behind the eye in the suprachoroidal space. It takes a light source. That's connected to glasses, and that sends a wireless signal back to the patient effectively in the form of flashing lights that they would see. They see flashing lights. You and I see vision. They'd see flashing lights in response to something in front of them. But the concept is really lights coming in, collected by an electrode. Light comes in by the glasses, it stimulates the electrode so that the patient sees light sources in response to a stimuli. It's not vision as you and I know it, but it's pixelates, it's flashes of light that come up that we believe the patient sees. And that's what, when you talk to the patients, that's what they say they see.
You're also a registered patent attorney, and the world has completely changed. Maybe like the 20 years, the world, I mean, everything was in a linear process. And when you created something, you had to to create a patent of it, so that you have the IP and stuff like that. But today the world is becoming more hyper connected. It's more open. So what are your views on this open source innovation versus patenting closed? I mean, could you give some thoughts on that?
Look, believe me, at one level, I'm all for open source, sharing information so that innovation can happen. And some things should be shared, right? Data in and of itself and knowledge, we put it out there. The whole thing about the patent system, as a patent attorney, the contract was, if you tell us what you've done, we'll reward you with a limited monopoly, right? That's the whole concept. It's like, we won't keep it secret. If you want to protect it with a patent, you've got to tell us what you've done. So it's knowledge sharing, because at the end of the patent period, the knowledge is available. But it's a lengthy process, an expensive process. The problem with open source, everything you do, you put out in the public domain, what are you protecting? And what's your moat around your product so that you can make money from your innovation? So it's a balance, really. So there's some things that their product life cycle is so fast and short that you would never, by the time you patented it, it's already obsolete, so why bother? And you're seeing so many apps and things like that. But a lot of the stuff that you and I just spoke about, highly regulated devices, highly regulated drugs, that you need to get a return, and the cost of development is so much, you need to know that if you finally make it, no one's going to copy it and just get a free ride on everything you've done. And you also need to protect the investment that you're making. So I think it's horses for courses. I think sometimes it's really smart to get as much information out there from a capitalist point of view, because you can make money quickly and you move on. It's constantly evolving. But I think in terms of the field that I work in, class 3 implantable medical devices, which, as I've just told you, can take a long time to get to market, you need to be patenting a lot, and you need to continually patent to protect, because just because you've come up with a way early on doesn't mean that someone won't be able to work around you. And so it's constant innovation. And the reason, and part of the things that we do, we monitor the patent literature very heavily to see what people are doing, so we can create more innovation by, oh, that's what they've done, I can make something a bit different that won't infringe their patent, but can make it better. So the patent system helps us continue to innovate, albeit you've got to be clever about it, as opposed to open source where I can just play. But if you want to get product that can help the human in the type of work that I do with drugs or implantables, someone needs to make money out of it in the end. And the reality is, if people can't get a return on their investment because they've got some level of protection, they won't develop it. So open source is very important for a number of areas, but I think patenting is just as important, particularly for the early stage innovator and entrepreneur, because they need to be rewarded for their ingenuity. And it depends what field that you're in, right? So if you're in the fast moving space with apps, probably doesn't matter. But if your genius is developing the new wave of medical devices or new drugs, you need to have that rewarded. And the system that does that is the patenting system.
Right. Fair enough. Your research work is also in bionic limbs. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, that's a very new one. We're so proud to have recruited Max Catalan from the Centre of Pain and Bionics Research at Chalmers University in Sweden. He's now joining us at Bionics. We're keeping his lab in Sweden. He's a pioneer in developing neurally mediated osseo-integrated implants. So people who've had amputations are usually wearing prosthetics, the socket-based thing. He's developing smart implants that can be directly implanted into the bone, whether it be the wrist bone, the arm or the elbow, the shoulder, below the knee or the hip. And he designs them in a way that they can become integrated into the person so that the brain can control the prosthetic, which is incredibly exciting. He's leading the world. But the other path of why we were keen to recruit him was that in amputees, as you may know, the incidence of a disease called phantom pain, where is incredibly debilitating for a lot of amputees. They can perhaps get a prosthetic that they help them move around, but it's the phantom pain, it's very problematic, and no one's ever been able to work out how to overcome it. One of the areas that we're working very closely with Max is developing, again, neurally mediated mechanisms with some techniques that we've also got at the Institute to treat people with phantom pain to overcome those conditions. So integrating two research streams, developing much better neurally integrated prosthetics where the brain can control the prosthetics that we add, and hopefully they become almost as normal as possible. And that is something that he leads the world in. And we think in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll have new clinical trials happening from Australia. But in parallel with that, also Max is developing a way to treat phantom limb pain using a combination of virtual reality and brain stimulation. And that fits into the field of work that we wanted to do previously in brain stimulation. He's now using that in prosthetic control and pain relief. And it's just such a fascinating intersection of two areas of research in one institute, which I think makes us quite unique.
Any advice for young people who are interested in pursuing a career in the field of bionics?
I think it's, to be honest, I think it's something they should really get behind. I'm old enough to remember the movie and the television series, The $6 Million Man, The Bionic Man, and people thought it was science fiction. It's no longer science fiction, Eddie. It's becoming mainstream, and there's so much to do, and it's so much fun because you're dealing with biology, you're dealing with electronics, you're dealing with mechanical engineering. If you've got an interest in any of those three fields, you can make an enormous impact by making better and better devices, because we've only just touched the surface. There's generations of devices to be made that haven't been made yet. And so anyone with an interest in A, those fields of interest, B, wanting to do stuff that can impact on the human condition, and C, see the results of what they're doing pretty quickly, this is an area I should get into. And I would love the next generation of scientists to be more involved in medical devices than drug development, to be honest, because I think the world can afford medical devices. They can't always afford the new drugs.
Right. How do you see the field of bionics evolving in the coming years, and what role do you see the Bionics Institute playing in the evolution?
I think you'll find a lot more devices will become smaller, much more integrated into the body, and we're controlling them in closed loop mechanisms. So the body's controlling the implanted device and turning it on and off as it comes along. And you'll see many more of those across cardiology, orthopedics, neurological disease. I can see that happening right now. I think we will play a major role because over the last 40 years, we've developed a basis of those skill sets that people want to build from. And some of the animal models and the surgical techniques to test these things very quickly. So I think we will always be making and leading the world in new advances. Whether or not we take them to the world ourselves, I'm not sure, but I think I'd like to have created in the next 10 years another 20 different devices that could be in 20 different companies that are making a difference to a number of people's lives. So I think we can do that. I think then people can look at us as an exemplar of the field and perhaps set up their own Bionics Institute in India or somewhere that perhaps we're collaborating with. Because if you look at India, you've got some incredible talent in data science, incredible talent in engineering, I think, and incredible talent in manufacturing. What you're possibly missing is some of the animal model work and some of the history that we've got. And I think that countries like India and countries in Southeast Asia could get much more heavily involved in device development than they've ever been, because drug development is so hard, but device development is that bit easier, and bionics could make a difference. And I think we can give everyone around the world an exemplar of how to do that.
Keep on doing your work. I mean, it's really exemplary, from being the pioneers of cochlear implant to now spreading your research across brain research, autoimmune and chronic conditions, to hearing and vision research, to bionic limbs. And I hope that there's more and more products from your institute going to the market and upending the healthcare. And on that note, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. And my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you. Really appreciate this.
Andy, I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. I hope it goes well.